at the Tea Table, the show's classic discussion segment where we share our long-form thoughts on a specific subject, whether it's recent news or something in Nintendo's past or something about their games, whatever it may be. This week, we have got an incredible Zelda trailer at the Game Awards, revealing so much information for Breath of the Wild. I'm going to assume that you guys listening have all seen it, and if you haven't, pause the podcast, look up that trailer, watch the heck out of it, get hyped, and come back here because, wow, I think we should just dive in. All right, so they revealed quite a few things here. It starts off with a Sheikah teardrop. It looks like this sort of canvas thing is the sort of like from the intro cutscenes of the game or some
the storytelling
sequence.
elements.
Yeah.
Reminds me a lot of Skyward Sword's intro.
Yeah, for sure, the way that the paintings move. But of course, it reminds me a lot of the way that they told the introduction to The Wind Waker, to A Link to the Past.
Yes, which is one of my favorite game intros of all time.
I find it really interesting that they're using a tapestry because this game seems to be drawing so much from so much of the Zelda series.
Totally.
And it's just a really fitting image to be telling the lore of this game through a tapestry.
Totally. And we'll get into that a lot soon. But I think one thing that stands out to me of this tapestry stuff is this group of people that they have like harvesting seeds and cultivating the land, I suppose, of Hyrule. They seem kind of shrunken and like they seem almost like this weird combination of like gross little like creatures like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, but in a very Zelda-like way. They
don't look distinctly human.
Right. They look kind of to me like a mix between Deku Scrubs, Koroks, and like early Hyrule settlers. So I don't know whether this is like a new race of people or if this is like maybe it's early moblins or something. But this really stood out to me. I think that this is actually going to play a bigger role in the game than we think so far. I think you might be able to meet this race.
And the one looks like it's holding an axe too.
Yeah. So I think this is really cool. I don't know if there's anything to draw from it really, but
I did see some people speculate, and I'm not sure how much I buy into this personally, but that the trees in the beginning sequence, which look like they have faces, kind of, might have been, since the Koroks are present in this game, they might have been the result of the Deku Tree's sort of plan to plant trees in the Wind Waker to restore the land.
Oh man, that is genius.
And so maybe that's a timeline reference.
I hope so. Absolutely. Yeah, that's really genius. And we'll see as we get deeper into this discussion, there are lots of callbacks in this trailer to various games in the series, building on what we saw of the Temple of Time, from Ocarina of Time, of course, in the Great Plateau. We see lots of other stuff here that I think is from several different games in the series. So, the next thing that really stood out was this village of people. And they actually, there's a sequence in the trailer that goes through a couple of different little village settings, and it looks like they are different settlements.
Yeah, definitely.
So what I love about this is that this feels very Miyazaki in the way that these tribes are sort of implemented into the world. It reminds me very much of Mononoke.
Yeah, their dwellings in particular look like something out of Mononoke.
Yeah, they feel like these civilizations are very, very ingrained into this world of wilderness. Like, they are small settlements. They seem somewhat nomadic. The most permanent structure that we've seen that seems inhabited still and not just in ruins is like this little hut with this big, it seems like a straw horse's head or like maybe a loftwing's head or something like that.
It's probably a horse's head because when you get to the close-up shot of that building, there's a shot of the door, and above it is another tapestry showing a guy with a horse, and the guy's riding a horse.
Yeah, and there's dogs, and it's so cute,
and it's actually like responding to things around it.
Yeah, is this the first time we've seen dogs in Zelda besides just the little annoying yappy Yorkie?
Well, there's the ones in Ocarina of Time. There's the ones in Twilight
too,
Princess.
Right?
Are there?
But
That's right, Twilight Princess. Okay.
In Twilight Princess, they didn't really do anything.
You could talk to them as Wolf Link, but they didn't really have too much to say.
Yeah, these dogs are dynamic and alive.
Yeah, I feel like these dogs may have some more interesting application in the game, whether they're useful in any way,
you can
or
go
you can just
hunting
have
with
fun
Wolf
with them.
Link, so maybe you'll be able to like tame wild dogs and go hunting with them if you don't have the Wolf Link amiibo.
Oh my god, that would be amazing. Oh my god.
Oh, and one thing we kind of passed over before we got to the village, but there's a scene where you see two warriors out fighting in the field, so maybe the dogs will come and join the warriors.
Oh, I don't think I noticed that.
Link is fighting a moblin, and if you look in the background, there's someone else also fighting a moblin.
I don't even think that's Link. I think that's two NPCs.
I think that might be NPCs. Maybe that's, Alex, you were saying, maybe Zelda could have connectivity features like Dark Souls where people can join each other's worlds. Maybe that's that in some way. That could be cool.
Yeah, so that could be the way other players are represented. It could just be you hire NPCs, kind of like you do in Skyrim and some other RPGs. Like, I don't know. Or could just be emergent systemic sort of stuff where the NPCs just go out on their own and do stuff.
Totally, and you meet them just
Which that would be really cool, because that was one of the things I like most about Majora's Mask, is how everyone in the game has their own cycles and schedules that they're on. You can find them out in a certain area of the game at a certain time. So it would be great if you can just find people out, like, hunting for food or battling monsters or just doing various things in the overworld. It would make it feel a lot more living.
Yeah, and we've already seen a little bit of that with the old man from the plateau, who will sometimes go and chop wood, and so this is all really great.
Yeah, and the woodcutter and everything. So after that little civilization, we see this area that has a couple hills. It's got some fences and some huts there. It's very colorful. There's a lot of living greenery over here, and posts with banners flying between them. It looks like this place is a very early settlement, or maybe one that's been lived in for a while and it's just sort of at the beginning of its harvest season, where things are planting and starting to grow. But this area in particular really, really reminds me of Skyloft. It's got lots of hills. It's got like little, very small land bridges connecting like one ledge to another, or one area of like a house to another. And especially this series of like tall posts with these little banners strung around them, that really reminds me of the decorations that Skyloft had. The huts feel very Skyloft. I don't know if this, is what happened to Skyloft, but it definitely makes me think that this is some sort of settlement. If not descended from them in lineage, then at least in spirit, from the developer side.
I agree.
I mean, I don't know. They're all Hylians inevitably, right? So then they're all.
That's true.
There's bound to be a connection of some sort.
They have like only 3 architects in all of Hyrule.
But in particular, what really reminded me of it, besides just the visual layout, is that it seems to be a sort of a little settlement based around harvesting and cultivation.
Yeah.
And maybe that's those little things we saw in the Tapestry earlier on in the trailer. But given that Skyloft had all the stuff going on with the pumpkins and like the beanstalks and the bamboo, I feel like there's got to be some connection there. And then, so after that, we see a very big revelation. Bird-like creatures. We don't know if they're friends or foes.
Bird person!
But there's this giant flying machine. Maybe, we don't know if it's like an airship or if it's an entire like civilization living up there. But it is this big flying machine.
And it's probably what we've seen in the background of some other videos, because we saw what looked like a floating island of some kind in previous trailers, so...
Yeah, definitely. So we see this big updraft of wind, which reminds me very much of the updrafts that Link can catch on his sailcloth. So that might be how he gets up there to the flying machine, is by finding one of these updrafts and makes his way up. Or maybe there's some new kind of
holes
item
in the fencing for where you could possibly jump into the stream.
I've had a couple of remarks on this, my own thoughts and things that I've seen from other people, but I actually just thought of something that I think would be the coolest. This obviously has some similarities to like Loftwings, because they're flying creatures, big beaks. The Skyward Sword-esque aesthetic really reminds me of the Loftwings in particular too. So this could be descended from that in some way. It could be connected to the Reto tribe in some way. I've seen some comparisons of this flying ship. To me, when I first saw it, it looked kind of like a big Loftwing-esque creature. Obviously not alive, but it's a big machine. But I noticed someone making a connection to the Helmarock King in design.
Yeah, definitely.
So I wonder if this group of birds is related in some way to Helmarocks. So there are a lot of potential story connections to other pieces of Zelda lore from throughout the history of the games. But what if these are the rocks? And this is how you get the Roc's Feather. And you fly up to their civilization with the Roc's Feather.
That would be pretty cool.
Oh, I'm so excited.
There's another comparison that I saw, which is there's a obscure enemy in Adventure of Link that's sort of toward the end of the game where there's these warrior bird creatures, and they're called like Faka, I think. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that in English.
That would be really cool.
But they look a lot like them. And we haven't seen them, obviously, since Adventure of Link.
That would be really cool. I love it when they tap deeper into the Zelda lore in things that were already pre-established. You know, when they make new lore stuff like the volcano creatures in Skyward Sword and stuff like that, I enjoy it, but what I really love is when they make the world that's already been laid out make more sense with itself and be more consistent. So if this is calling back to Zelda 2 and explaining those guys, that would be amazing.
Yep.
Same with the rocks.
Yep. And just another kind of random observation, if you look at the airship, it sort of has these sort of purple, magical, pulsating lines, kind of like the Guardians when they're activated. Yeah. So I've seen a lot of speculation that maybe this is a dungeon.
Oh, yeah, this could definitely be a dungeon.
This scene where we see the bird fly up is also, I think, the first time that we've seen Link have the Master Sword on his person.
Yes, and we also see it later in the game, too. So it's the first time he's got the Master Sword, and that could mean that you are supposed to get the Master Sword by the time you see this. It could mean that the player just emergently found the Master Sword successfully. But the other things that are really cool, I think, about this are it also reminds me of the ancient civilization in Twilight Princess. So maybe this is related to that in some way, like the ancient civilization of the Uku, which were also birds, abandoned like that flying city, and then this flying city is maybe the new thing that they or their
Zelda
descendants...
is all about its flying cities and weird bird creatures.
And it's funny that you say that, because in Twilight Princess HD there was actually a texture added to the game, or actually a series of textures, but one of them depicted bird people that looked pretty much a lot like the Retos. So I'm wondering if they're sort of retroactively working these guys into the lore.
That would be really interesting, because I was thinking, the reason I specifically thought of this is because the propellers on this ship that make it fly really remind me of the Flying City, in the way that had propellers all around the bottoms. There were some propeller puzzles involved, and the hook shots would always grab onto lots of like propeller-like things, and you fought a bird at the end. So there's so many connections here.
Well, and if there's a city in the sky, they'd need a way to get around, and an airship's the perfect way to do that.
Absolutely. So I am so stoked to see how they could tie so many of these things together. Should we move on, though?
Sure.
Flying City, all exhausted. So we got some more shots of, like, Guardians, and I think, Alex, you mentioned that the Flying City had these pulsating sort of magenta lines, sort of a fuchsia almost, and these shots of the Guardians, they're glowing in the same sort of fuchsia color, so that's really interesting.
And I also think that it's interesting that right before they show the Guardians running around in the field, they give us another look at the like Tapestry storytelling element, and it's Hyrule Castle just with an army of these Guardians in front of it.
Yeah, and it's not clear whether the army is invading or defending, and I think you could make a case for either, so that's really interesting to me. But next up, the first of one, possibly two women that they show in this trailer. They just show a brief side shot of someone who is holding her hands together. Her clothes seem very functional, so a lot of people have been speculating, is this female Link? Is this Link's sister Linkle? Maybe it could be Ariel coming back in some way. Not that the Wind Waker Ariel would be alive, but just in the same way that, Zelda recycles characters like Dampé and Impa all the time, so maybe Ariel could be here. And, she's got like a sort of adventurer's pouch. She's got the same color blue and sort of gold decorations that Link has when he wakes up and when he's got his blue sort of clothes and cloak and everything. So people have been speculating who this character is, and what do you guys think?
I'm a little more inclined to think it's this iteration of Princess Zelda rather than a female Link or Linkle.
I actually think this is a different character than a character we see later in the trailer. That one, who I believe is Princess Zelda.
Do you? Okay, I haven't had a close enough comparison of the two, I guess.
They have totally different outfits. They both have long blonde hair, but they have totally different outfits, which either says to me that this is one woman and the one at the end is another woman who I think is Zelda, or that this is one woman who maybe is Zelda, maybe she's playable, but that this woman, you can change her outfit just in the same way you can change Link, which would also indicate that she's a playable character that you can sort of tweak around the outfits and armor sets with, and that cutscene that they showed later in the trailer is just the same character dressed in a different set of clothing.
And of course, Nintendo had to film it in such a way where you don't get to see either woman's face, so they got to keep the suspense going.
Oh, of course. They want us to be talking about this. We are playing right into their hands.
And I'm fine with that.
Oh, it's so exciting. This is what I want to do.
I'm definitely inclined to agree with Colin, though. I think they might be different characters. I think even if they're the same character, at least the character's role has sort of changed somewhat, possibly because of Link's
Zelda
absence
situation.
from the world. I could totally see this being a sort of female heroine that's sort of risen up to defend people in Link's absence.
Definitely.
In which case, I could see this character being playable at some point. Either through the main story, and this is an idea that I'd really like to see fleshed out, in a sort of New Game Plus, where you play the game story from her perspective.
Oh, that would be really
great.
cool. That would be amazing.
It's like mostly the same content, but the story kind of goes a different way, and you start off at a different place, and all these other things. Like that would be a really cool implementation. She could be a companion character, kind of like those NPCs that we saw fighting monsters earlier. Like, I don't know how she'll be implemented, but
I think they could make cutscenes that tell the story as the game goes on, but are just tweaked in small different ways depending on how much of the world that you've explored as Link. Because obviously players are going to be getting items in totally different ways. Like, this is a very, very, very non-linear Zelda game. So I think that they could use this character potentially to just explain anything that you do as Link that you've accomplished that needs some sort of where in order to progress the story, something else has to have happened in the game, but because you have gotten to this point in the game and not done the previous requirement, they just explain it by saying, like, oh yes, this other player character has sort of achieved that. Like, Zelda did this while you were away, or Linkle did this, and so this is why you can now activate the Guardians, for example.
Sure, yeah.
And then just do the exact opposite if you're playing as Linkle or Zelda or whoever this is, and they say, the other hero somewhere else figured it out, like, you don't even need to think about it. They wouldn't even necessarily tell you about it. They would just say, story's moving on as is, don't question it, and then that's how it sort of makes sense in retrospect.
Sure.
Because this world is so big and so exciting and so limitless.
Yeah.
All right, and then, Hyrule Castle is getting sort of bombarded by lots of, like, purple bright fire in a later scene.
Looks like the same kind of stuff we saw around Calamity Ganon earlier.
Yes, definitely. It reminds me of the same sort of fuchsia glow of the Guardians and of this bird civilization, so even though I feel like there will be a twist where the Guardians are meant to protect, this seems like it's the same sort of magical force. Is dangerous. So perhaps there's some sort of, like, situation if they're defending Hyrule Castle where there's, like, a nuclear meltdown, but it's magic.
Yeah. This sort of reminds me of two things. One of them is it seems like it's sort of a magical corruption that's sort of seeping out and leaching onto the land.
Totally.
But it also reminded me of a moment in Wind Waker when they described Ganon's return as Ganon returning to Hyrule in a red wrath. And you can totally see that in that scene.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I'd forgotten about that line.
So that brings a question. The Koroks evolved from the Kokiri only after the Great Flood, right?
Yeah.
Not between Ocarina of Time and the Great Flood?
That's how we know they came about, but there's nothing really preventing them from coming about, say, in another timeline for completely unrelated reasons.
Ugh, I hate that. I just... we'll get into this later because there's yet more to see, but I just want them to combine the timelines with this thing. Like, I can't do it anymore.
I don't know that I'd want them to, like, on the nose combine the timelines, but I'd love to see them, like, just do an amalgamation of all the stories up to this point and sort of take it as an author taking creative liberty with the legends that have been done and letting it be self-contained in that way.
Absolutely.
I love when the Zelda games feel that way.
Oh, absolutely. It's the legend of Zelda. It's not the story of Zelda. It's not the life of Zelda. It's the legend. It's the way that the story, the tale, has lived on, told by people thousands of years down the line. Like, this is a interpretation of folklore being told before us here, and that's what I like to see. I don't like it when they're like, this is exactly what happened. I like it when they reinterpret everything every time. Yeah,
like that's what one thing I really liked about Skyward Sword's Master Sword Origin Tale is it wasn't just verbatim the versions that we'd heard before. It was a completely sort of different take on that story.
But that's also what I love about, like, Ocarina of Time versus A Link to the Past and versus for example, Twilight Princess. Like, they are the same basic story structure, sure, but that's a good thing. They are interpreted in different ways, and that's what I love about them. Like, you can... I like to think of A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time, for example. Let's just take this example and make it as simple as can be. I like to think of that as the same story, like the exact same events, but just told, like, A Link to the Past is the way that one father in modern Hyrule would tell the story to his son, whereas Ocarina of Time is like how, some mother in Hyrule would tell the story to her daughter, or like a teacher would like tell a class about ancient mythology, say, ancient Hyrule was founded when like this and this and this happened. Some accounts say that there was a representative of the Sheikah tribe who like outlasted all the others, but some have no record of this character.
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting how Wind Waker and A Link to the Past both reference the events of Ocarina of Time, but Wind Waker only talks about the hero and excludes the sages, whereas A Link to the Past does the opposite.
Yes. Yeah.
Really focuses on the sages and their descendants and the seal on the sacred realm, but makes no mention of a hero whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah, so those are the ways that I love the Zelda games to interact with each other lore-wise, and so I feel like as the games grow and they try to take the timeline more and more seriously, it makes less and less sense, and so when we get things like Triforce Heroes that we need to worry about...
Looking at you, Four Swords Adventures placement.
Yeah, right? I mean, like, when we get stuff like that, trying to make it all make sense together, I want them to just break that up with a game that sort of recombines things, takes creative liberties, and says... Look, here's the way that the timeline unfolds, but it's all very open to interpretation. Like, these are supposed to be legends, and the mythology aspect is supposed to be interesting, and you're supposed to want to keep trying to think about the ways not only that these stories affected each other, but the ways that history and the countless retellings of these legends have affected the legends themselves. So yeah, little tangent there. Let's go back to the...
There's actually a nice segue into the next thing we see in the trailer, which is a ruined town with a fountain at the center that looks exactly like the one from Twilight Princess.
Looks exactly like Twilight Princess's Hyrule Castle fountain area.
Yep.
And there's like torn banners that resemble the banners from the Twilight Princess Castle Town Square.
Yeah.
So it's very clear that this is supposed to be the same place.
Absolutely. So this is very clearly Castletown from Twilight Princess, if not in actuality, then just like at least inspired by the same sort of idea of Castletown. Whether or not this is literally the Castletown from Twilight Princess, whether, it's caught up in some sort of timeline thing or whatever's going on, at least visually the interpretation is the same, so it plays really well into the idea that these legends, are up to interpretation, and so maybe this is the Castletown from Ocarina of Time, but it looks like the one from Twilight Princess because that's the way the legends work. I love it. Anyway, so this is a very clear Twilight Princess callback, but it also means that now the story has very clear connections to Wind Waker with the Koroks, etc., Twilight Princess with the Castletown being right here, Ocarina of Time with the Temple of Time and the Great Plateau,
and Skyward Sword with Hylia everywhere.
And possible, whether maybe those things are descendants of Loftwings in some way. I think they said Loftwings are really intelligent in Skyward Sword, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
So, yeah.
And another nice thing that we get to see in the town scene is we see Ganon's corrupting influence everywhere. There's these purple goo and purple crystal structures, and it's just...
Yep, and these big stone spires spiking out of the ground, coming together at their tips.
All seem to be pointing toward Hyrule Castle.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But then we also see Link sort of sparkling there, and I can't tell if he has the Master Sword yet or not, but it looks to me like he's mostly just got his bow.
Yeah,
I agree.
So, first of all, I think this is probably the scene where he's sort of like discovering the ruins of Hyrule and discovering, his past or Hyrule's past or however they want to do this. But the sparkling is clearly significant of something. And I don't know if this is the first time we see this, or if I'm just noticing this for the first time, but I notice here, Link's blue clothes, at the neck piece, the visual design of those white lines form the Master Sword pointing downwards.
You're correct.
On his chest. So I don't know if that's significant in any way, or if that's just a cool design idea that the artists made, but I love it. It's so cool.
I could see it being significant, because the sword pointing down tends to imply it's at rest. And if he's the hero awakened, and he's been sleeping for 100 years, so his clothes should reflect that in some way.
I hope that that's not like a actual piece of the story, though. I hope that that's just a sort of like poetic idea from the artists.
No, totally agreed.
But very, very cool thing to notice either way. And then next is we see this other character, or possibly same character. Link is kneeling. He's got the Master Sword. They are at this sort of castle-ish type area. And how you can tell that this is at least a character in a different outfit than the other one we saw before is she has white gloves. The other character had brown gloves.
Yep.
And she's got a dress. Or at least what seems to be a dress, decorated
something a little
some
more
kind.
Adorned than the tunic she was wearing.
And just thematically, I agree with what you said earlier, that when Link's all sparkly and stuff, that's likely him discovering like Hyrule civilization or learning about his past, because it then immediately transitions into him bowing before, possibly Princess Zelda. So it just thematically it all seems to flow very nicely into him discovering Hyrule.
Definitely.
Yeah, I've heard some people say that maybe these scenes with him with the Master Sword are flashbacks. I actually kind of like that idea.
That's interesting.
Maybe the glowing is symbolizing him recalling a memory.
That could be really cool.
This definitely looks like a castle environment, but it doesn't look ruined. It doesn't look like it's covered in darkness, like the ruined castle scene we just saw.
Well, I wonder if there's like a dark world and a light world, and in this game you start in the dark world.
That would be really awesome.
Maybe.
You just blew my mind, Colin.
I just don't see them having to double the overworld.
Oh yeah, no, I know. It's such a huge game. Like it would have to be like the dark world would be. Or the light world, I guess it would be much smaller. Like maybe the light world,
pockets of light world.
You get to like the Twilight Princess overworld, and things are going well there. Maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, it would have to be a very small area comparatively, but I could see that potentially happening to explain why so much of civilization is so torn apart in the world that you are starting the game in, and then you discover the ruins of Hyrule, and then you're transported to the place where things are going well, and that's sort of like where the resistance is growing.
Sure.
So yeah, there was that. But that is pretty much the end of the trailer. I have a couple more thoughts I want to discuss from what we saw from the gameplay. The only thing that I wanted to mention was they interacted with this bird character.
Cass, the minstrel.
Yeah.
Who seems very similar to all these things we were just talking about in the trailer. He's a traveling minstrel, and he sings songs. First of all, I noticed the song he plays on his accordion and sings is the same as the song from the trailer.
Yep.
So that's thematically significant in a big way.
Theme song.
His tune and his clues that he gives in this song are very clearly descended mythologically in some way from the thing that you are trying to uncover about Hyrule's past. So that I think is really, really cool. But I also noticed gameplay-wise, they use him in a way that is very, very similar to NPCs in games like the original Legend of Zelda, or A Link to the Past, or Link's Awakening, and the Oracle games.
In particular, the NES game.
Yes.
Like, I didn't really appreciate it the first time I saw, but I went back and actually just read his hint straight through, and this is right out of the first game. This is the same exact style of delivery.
And this is the first time we've seen that sort of like overworld NPCs giving you mysterious hints in a 3D game, I think.
Yeah.
Which is
You're right.
just a whole new sense of exploration and discovery.
Totally. It's always been related in some way to your next direct story objective. Like you're going to need to talk to someone in order to accomplish this, or something. Like this is a character who you can just run into in the overworld, and whether you talk to him or not, whether you even find him or not, doesn't matter. You can still accomplish your objectives. But if you do find him, it's a nice little moment. You interact with cool characters, and you also get a hint as to where you need to go next. Really thoughtful, so well implemented, and I am so glad that Zelda is coming back to this. It is very exciting and inspiring the way that they use fantastical characters to do this, like they have done with games like Wind Waker and Skyward Sword. But their gameplay use is one that is very much rooted in, Zelda games of old. So I love seeing that. That is just so exciting and so encouraging. It's not going to be something that I think I will be like legitimately excited and hyped about when I get the game, but it works so well for Zelda, and I am so satisfied to see this. I know I'm never gonna think of a moment to talk about it again, so I just got to get it off my chest now.
No, I'm totally with you. It was the most significant moment of that gameplay footage for me too.
Yeah.
I love that it's not putting a waypoint on your map when you get a hint.
And you can put a waypoint on your map if you want to.
Yeah, right. Look for this structure that kind of looks like this.
Yeah, and so it's very encouraging then, too, that he is a character that you meet in the overworld outside of the Great Plateau, because that gives me a lot of hope that the Great Plateau is really the tutorial area where they do things like mark waypoints, because we saw that in E3. There were a couple moments where it would tell you, hey, look at the map, and, hey, you've got a new waypoint.
Listen.
So hopefully that means that once you get out of the Great Plateau, the game has forced you to interact with those mechanics as much as it ever will, and then it just opens you up to do whatever you want.
Yep.
The last final thing, before they ended that gameplay at the Game Awards, the glowing light that Bill Trennan didn't want to walk towards, that he said we were going to leave some mysteries. In that glowing light was a statue of the goddess Hylia. So it is significant in some way that those will be waypoints, or perhaps markers in the overworld that unlock the next sort of objective in some way, whether it's a significant like spiritual objective that Link actually has to hunt down in order to make progress, or it's just something that sort of upgrades your abilities. We don't know, but and it's another Skyward Sword connection, and it's another just sort of small glimpse into the kind of gameplay structure we'll see from Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, the other point that I found really interesting from the gameplay demo was that there was a pretty decently diverse group of enemies, like different sizes and shapes and weapons. And like there was some that were smart enough to avoid your bombs, and there were some that were shooting electric arrows. There was one that hit Link and did 7 damage, took away 7 hearts with a single hit. And there were chameleon enemies that blended in with the foliage. Like a lot of people have been saying, "Oh my God, it's Dark Souls is Zelda now, or Zelda is Dark Souls now."
That's always my reaction.
And that's really interesting to me.
Zelda was Dark Souls. Dark Souls was Zelda when it came out.
Yeah, it's come full circle now.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Yeah. I was having totally the same vibes. That moment reminded me a lot of the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time when I was like a kid and I was first going in there and the wolves came out and I had no idea what to do. I was screwed. I was young, so I was like scared that I was gonna die. Now that I know that dying in games makes things a lot more fun and interesting and challenging, I am excited by that, and I am happy at the prospect that I'm probably going to die when I just try to do some things without really thinking too much about what might be behind the corner. And I love that those kind of experiences are going to be happening again in Zelda, finally, because they have not been for such a long time.
Oh, well, if we're getting into gameplay, I'll give you my condensed thoughts on things. So I agree with both of you. I really love the enemy diversity. Like that was the most encouraging thing about the whole combat aspect to me was these enemies are doing interesting things. They're not just attacking you with melee attacks. They're grouping up on you and all jumping out at you from.
Oh, and there's that one
camouflage.
that they threw a bomb at, and he avoided the bomb.
Yep.
The enemy had an AI that said, "No, I know what's going to happen here, and I'm still coming for you, Link."
Yeah, there was an enemy that cast a spell with a large area of effect, which we've never seen in a 3D Zelda game before.
Oh wow, I didn't notice that.
That was really
actually
cool. Like it was a big dome of lightning that one of the Lizalfos cast.
Oh, I probably saw that and then just didn't remember it, I guess, then.
Sure. We saw tons of different weapons for Link to use. There was a lightning rod, which we've never really had lightning-based attacks in a Zelda game before, so that's cool. He had Lizalfo's spear. I know we saw this a little bit at E3, but we got to see him sort of throw it again, and how that's an interesting combat mechanic we haven't seen. It's just really cool how fast-paced and diverse the combat is.
Totally agreed. Yeah, man, everything that Zelda's doing with Breath of the Wild is just... I haven't seen a single thing that I can say I don't like.
Right. No, totally. I agree. So you mentioned, Ben, that there was an enemy that took off 7.5 hearts. I love that they're showing Link with gear that we didn't have access to in the Great Plateau demo.
Yeah.
So probably stronger gear, and he's still taking this much damage.
Yeah. Very scalable game.
And we heard a report a little while back that the E3 demo that we all played was actually toned down, and that the real game will be a little harder, but that they didn't want media to get too frustrated with their first hands-on attempt with the game.
Which is great, because you could still get one-shotted in that demo.
Yeah. I mean, I am hoping to some extent that they've got a sort of like Zelda Breath of the Wild Lite version for like the kids who want to play this, because like I don't think I would be nearly as into Zelda as I am now. Zelda is like one of the best media franchises of all time, I think, and I would not have gotten into it if it weren't accessible, at least for the first half of the game, with games like Ocarina of Time and Link to the Past and even like Twilight Princess and Wind Waker. It's important, I think, that Breath of the Wild is still accessible for kids, and while I think it is more important that they make it great for adults in this way and make it this difficult, I do hope that they have some sort of option like difficulty, normal or young hero.
I think that's what the gear is for, and that's what the food is for, and that's what the damage bonuses are for.
Maybe, but if you've got gear that strong and it's still doing 7 hearts of damage, I don't know. I mean, I agree with you that the best way to do that is scaling the difficulty through the gear that's available. But I just want to make sure that kids can get like halfway through the game at least and really love what they're doing, and not just have to lose.
I mean, we haven't seen we haven't seen what progress in this game looks like, really. So I don't know if, for example, they have a way to lead you kind of by the hand through the areas that you're most balanced for. Like, I don't know if they do that at all. I don't know how the weapon scaling really works when you get out in the world. Like, a lot of those things could be designed in such a way that this isn't a problem.
Yeah, you're very right. And I think they should be designed in a way that that's not the problem. That would be the easiest solution. But they shouldn't do it in a way that's hand-holding, like, you know...
No, for sure.
Definitely the most encouraging thing about Breath of the Wild is how free you are to do your own thing the way that you want to do it. So if that guide that lets younger players and novice players who want to have a little bit safer of a journey, if that intrudes in any way on the freedom at which more competent players like us can explore, that'll just be really frustrating.
Give me liberty or give me death.
No, absolutely agree. Like, it could be something subtle, like numbering the actual dungeons in some way. Like,
sure.
I don't know how they'll do it, but it's possible. And Ocarina of Time even kind of gave you some freedom in the second half, but definitely gave you a suggested order in which to do things too.
Right, definitely. Like, Ocarina of Time, I think, did it well in that it was difficult enough, but totally playable as a kid when you were young Link. And when you turned to adult Link, the difficulty ramped up very noticeably. And just presentationally, I think that put me in the mindset to say, like, okay, this is hardcore right now. This is a tough game I'm playing, and I'm going to get serious about this. So I think they can use the dramatic elements like that in Breath of the Wild to present the same sort of change in mindset of the player, too, and use that to their advantage in some way.
Sure. And maybe this is just me being optimistic, but I remember kids beating the NES Zelda games, which are certainly much harder. My wife grew up on Zelda too. So they can do it.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I feel like there are so many more games to play these days. I think a lot of the reason that kids could beat the old Zelda games wasn't because they were easy enough, but because they poured so much time into it, because
that was
you
the
didn't
game.
Just have as many games available to you. Because now kids have smartphones and everything.
Yeah, you're totally right. But I guess I'm a little more confident than you in the ability of the kids who will be picking up, say, a Wii U or a Switch.
Oh, sure. No, I'm not saying this to say that kids are bad at playing video games or anything. I'm saying this to say that there are lots of distractions. There are lots of games available these days.
Sure.
There are a lot of players who play video games just because it makes you feel good. You can have these big accomplishments without having to put yourself through too much trial.
Sure.
And that's not to say that accomplishing things without trying is what Zelda should be. I think that's what's kind of made games in the last, several 3D Zelda iterations a lot less meaningful to me, is that you could accomplish big things without trying too hard. But I do think that they need to balance that player attitude into the game in a careful enough way that those kinds of players aren't lost in this and don't just then, say, well, I'm going to go back to playing Minecraft, or I'm going to go back to playing, ukulele or something.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And I think Nintendo's being kind of sensitive to that because we saw with the amiibo functionality that they're very much taking the approach they took with Twilight Princess HD, and it's really, you have the amiibo, the game can be much easier for you.
Totally agreed. Hello everybody, thank you for listening to this Nintendo Week Clip NWC. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to us here on YouTube for more highlights and discussion videos from Nintendo Week Podcast, or subscribe to us on iTunes for weekly breakdowns of all your Nintendo news, discussion segments on subjects, games, and more, and tons of other features. Thanks for listening, and we will see you tomorrow with another NWC.